Pity is a very difficult emotion for anyone who's empathic and in one of these relationships, because it puts you in that caregiving rescuer role. And much like trying to save an injured porcupine, you may feel bad for the creature, but you are going to get stuck by their quills. You know how we say, like, sometimes less is more? Well, less can feel like more, but is actually less in narcissistic relationships. And yet it still messes us up. All right, so I'm going to give you a literature lesson today. I'm going to paraphrase Edith Wharton. Okay, bear with me. There's a character in her novel speaking of the power and influence of people in their midst. They were rich New Yorkers. And she says, well, isn't that the reason for their influence? Maybe they're so influential because they make themselves so rare. So if you've ever been in a narcissistic relationship, you recognize that love bombing and trauma bonding, maybe we could put it all together and call it trauma bombing, because that's a little of what it is, right? But if you have, you know that love bombing is not as simple as gifts and attention and obsession. Love bombing works because it's also about scarcity. Think of all the stories and tropes and, frankly, dating advice from people who are counseling other people who are staring at their phones and wondering when the new person who they really are into will text them back. Like, okay, I'm going to wait an hour. I'm going to do something for an hour. And then they don't text you back, right? You're convinced you had a great date or two. It's been going for a few weeks. And in the early weeks, they would respond right away and tell you good morning and good night and tell you that they've never felt this way and tell you what they're doing, blah, blah, blah. Like, you felt in touch and connected with them. And then a few weeks in, the responses aren't so quick, or they don't come at all. And for the first time, you start wondering, what did I do wrong? They were getting back to me before. And their excuses at times are plausible. Oh, I've been so busy at work. I caught up in a deadline. I had a cold. I was dealing with a family issue. But folks, sending a text takes 10 seconds. And when you talk to dating and matchmaking experts, I'm thinking folks like Matthew Hussey or Ask a Matchmaker's Maria, they will say, set standards and stick to them, or even give you even more brass tacks rules. Like, if somebody hasn't texted you back in 48 hours, they're not interested in you. But people don't like that advice. And that scarcity that gets created in these relationships becomes the beginning of the trauma-bonded experience for many people. Because maybe they go 49 hours or all the way to 60 hours. You're doing all the things, you're journaling about your standards, you've already figured out how you're going to say your goodbye, you're scrolling through relationship advice on social media, and then bing, you pick up your phone and it's from them. Babe, God, I missed you. A few days not talking to you felt like an eternity. Oh, I hate this job. I just want to run off to a tropical island with you and live on coconuts and love forever. You game for that? And all that relationship advice about standards and 48 hours melts and you forgive it all. And you also forget that it just took 10 seconds to send a text and it took them 60 hours. And you start thinking of yourself as a neurotic, needy head case who needs to get it together because they're clearly into you and you love every minute with them. This scarcity dance can go on for a while. They'll keep saying, I'm so busy. They may be slow on responding, but when they do, it's like mainlining drugs. It's like the angels are singing, and that alternation between the intensity of the dates, the poetic quality of the texts, you're the only bright spot in my life BS, and then disappearing, that's trauma bonding 101. Scarcity leads us to crave things. Someone tells you you can't eat sugar, you crave it. But scarcity also leads us to doubt when it happens in a relationship. And then we sell ourselves on a narrative of our own neurosis. And the narcissistic partner will jump on that quickly. They'll say, oh, you're just my needy little cutie pie. I love how much you love our time together. Trust me this, folks, in 6 months, you're not going to be a cutie pie. You're just going to be needy, and they're going to be mean about it. This has lethal effects in childhood. The narcissistic parent is as slippery as an eel and relatively unreachable. In the most classical case, it's the unavailable narcissistic father. That gendered approach to it, I think that's slipping. I think more moms are clocking in as narcissistic. But regardless, either parent, whomever it is that is narcissistic, they're busy. And the word around the family is, never bother them when they are working. Their study or their desk is like a sacred sanctum looked at with reverence. When they come home from work, you don't know whether to be excited or scared because you don't know if they had a good day or not. So you become hyper vigilant and you read their faces. Even listen for the frequency of the sound of their keys in the door or the tone of your other parent's voice, perhaps when they were on the phone with them. But many narcissistic parents are just simply scarce. They're just doing their own thing. So to get an audience with them is a big deal. They may do something like take you on an errand or ask you to help them with something around the house they need to get done. The errand, the task, it's what they want. You don't want to do it. You want them to throw a ball with you or play with you. Again, it's not them taking that time to do the thing you want. It's them calling you, beckoning you to do what they want. So when they do beckon you, you go running because maybe this time, and it is very rare that this happens, they'll care. Maybe they'll be interested, laugh, maybe take you out for ice cream. A child doesn't have words for this. These little interludes, though, contribute to this sort of pseudo sense of safety. See, they love me, they see me, they want me to go with them. I am someone to them. I remember for myself that sometimes I would I'd be the one who got to go on the errand to the local men's clothing store. It was stultifyingly boring. There were these two big velvet chairs in the store and a big bay window with wooden framing on it that looked outside. I don't even know why I was brought there, but I remember being so bored and I was looking for patterns and the colors of the ties. I remember once I tried to touch them and move them around because I was so bored and I got scolded by the man who worked there. The store, though, was sort of rather grand, and I would be so bored I'd pretend I lived in it. That was my house and I lived in it. The thing, though, that wasn't happening as I tried to entertain myself in the stores, I was not for a second attuned to by the parent who brought me. And let me tell you, men's clothing is dull. It's grays and browns and blacks, so the whole thing was dull and boring and had nothing to do with me as a child. But it was probably one of the only times I would be included. And I'll be frank with you, forget that issue, that ended up becoming a pattern that hamstrung me for most of my adult life. In relationship after relationship, I would go along with things that my partner wanted to do that had 0% interest to me. But I would do it just as a way to have time with them. I don't do that anymore. It takes a while to break these cycles. I'm almost 60. So the more unavailable the narcissistic parent, in some ways, the more desirable they become. A sort of a greater mythology can build up around the parent. People will say things like, my parent is a great doctor, my parent's a great man, my parent's an important person, doing big things in the world, has important meetings, we have important people over. So if that great, important parent actually invokes your presence, for that moment, you're important, you're valued, maybe you're even loved. Children can often be commandeered in these systems to become errand runners. They will help with anything, just to have that time with that scarce narcissistic parent, just for the chance to bring them a cup of coffee and learn to walk slowly so it doesn't spill and burn them. I had a friend with narcissistic parents when I was growing up, and she would notice when her parents' cigarettes got low. And then she would ride her bike to the package store, liquor store, I guess you say, to get more for them. So they would say, Jenny saved the day. And maybe if she was lucky, she'd get some candy money out of it. I had a client that had learned to mix a martini by the time he was 10. The vermouth, the olives, the glass, all of it. Children become pint-sized valets, bartenders, baristas, and assistants to get the distracted, detached, and unavailable parent to notice them for a brief moment. And many folks I have worked with in therapy have said that draw of that unavailable parent, narcissistic parent, was more compelling and made the justifications and rationalizations even harder to break. You waited for that break in the clouds where that narcissistic parent gave you their son for a moment. The assumptions around scarce people who are important to us is that somehow we are lacking something or have to perform to be loved or even noticed, and that we're lucky when we finally are. We look around and say, well, there's other people around them that are noticed. Maybe they're work helpers, or the guy helping with the drywall, or the pretty lady at the hardware store they sometimes take you to, but not you. As we get to adulthood, we get to hear how compelling all the other people in their lives are. We wonder why we aren't being texted back. We assume it's us. That's why they aren't texting us back or calling us back. And we all know the dating paradigms out there, like being the cool girl, the easy breezy, I'm so cool if they don't text me back or reach out. Folks, you aren't okay with that. So you start having to trick yourself that you are. But obviously, this is most impactful in childhood, where we spend an entire childhood trying to get that absent, uninterested, disconnected, unattuned, selfish, entitled, unempathic parent to look at us, to notice us, and to be something they can never be, which is a parent, a caring, loving, attuned parent. That lack of capacity is in them. It was never a lack of lovability in you. But scarcity is powerful, just as Edith Wharton says. Their influence may come from their rarity. Be aware of how this withholding, withdrawing, never quite there dynamic can make the tiny breadcrumb scraps of them being there so compelling, and the shifts we will make in ourselves, doing things we don't want to do, being sure we do every single thing we are asked, and blaming ourselves when that parent or person isn't available or interested, but planting the seed in our minds that if only I was important enough, that they would notice me. Be aware of this dynamic, whether it is the disinterested parent or the disinterested partner, because this scarcity dynamic can lead us to fight for something that simply is not worth fighting for. So let's talk about the 4 emotions that keep you trauma bonded and stuck. Let's make this a game. Before I say them, drop them in the comments. If this was a test, I'd give you partial credit if you got some of them. Most of you don't have to dig too deep to find them. Most of you could probably close your eyes and find the answer of the 4 emotions that keep you trauma bonded because you feel them every day. And these 4 emotions are why you find it difficult to get out of a relationship, if you're in a narcissistic relationship, even if it's family, that you know is not good for you, and why you make excuses, and why, especially if it was a family relationship that started in childhood, you find that you're often quite stuck in your life, even years out. So ready? These are the 4 tormenting voices you hear all the time. You can pause it, put your answer in the comments, see if you're right. Ready? They're guilt, grief, pity, and shame. Okay, guilt, grief, pity, and shame. We almost never just feel one of these, and each one magnifies the other, right? You may feel guilty for thinking someone close to you is narcissistic, or because they did something nice for you last week. You may feel grief at the lack of a healthy childhood, or lack of having, your marriage not having been healthy. You may feel an overarching sense of shame, almost a sense of damage or isolation at the confusion and messiness of your relationship. And this can be worse if you are in a relationship with a grandiose narcissist that people like, or a communal narcissist that's viewed as a savior or a pillar of the community, or a self-righteous narcissist that people view as an ultra-moral, sort of straight and narrow kind of person. And of course, then there's pity, especially if you're in a relationship with a sad, vulnerable, narcissistic person who is socially awkward and nothing seems to work out for them and is anxious. You feel bad for them. Almost every survivor I know feels all 4 of these every day. Sometimes you may not feel the pity, especially if you're in a relationship with a more malignant or slick, grandiose narcissist. But even then, if the narcissistic person you're in a relationship with, whatever the nature of the relationship is, has a complicated or traumatic backstory, or they were abused or neglected as a child, or you can see that their parent or their parents was every bit as bad as them or even worse, then you may feel sorry for them. But during the Hoover or the crocodile tears that the narcissistic person may sometimes cry to get you back, or when you decide to leave or set a boundary, those can also pull for pity. Now, these four emotions are tricky because they're real. You feel them, they're real. You feel these things. But it's the stuff that comes before them, especially how distorted our thoughts get and the confusing and manipulative behavior in these relationships that are the issue. Guilt and shame go hand in hand. You don't have one without the other. Guilt is personal. It's the perception that you did something wrong or bad. Shame is that sort of public sense of being seen as bad. The guilt is a tough one because in most cases, people in narcissistic relationships are experiencing lots of harm, but not harming the other person, but are being told that they're harming the other person. Remember Darvo? Deny, attack, reverse victim offender. When the narcissistic person denies doing something bad that they did, then attacks you and then plays victim. Thank you, Dr. Jennifer Fried, for that one. That's the dance. Unless you know what you are up against, it is so easy to get pulled into the backflow of the narcissistic person playing victim. Any normal relationship thing you do, express a need or an opinion or a belief or set a boundary or attempt to communicate a feeling, you're told that you're bad or you're wrong or you're selfish or you're entitled or you're demanding. So, if you're not narcissistic, then you feel guilty. Guilt is an origin emotion for children who grew up with narcissistic parents. It may be one of the early emotions the child recalls experiencing because the child from an early age is sensing that they're doing something wrong, that they're an inconvenience, that they're a financial drag, that they need to keep quiet, that they aren't being helpful, that they can't fix the situation around them. So the child has an early sense of guilt that propels them through childhood. You know it, many of you lived it. These are children who are at risk of becoming perfectionistic or anxious or distracted or just sad because they always feel guilty and bad and always try to be better and more and enough. It doesn't work because the narcissistic parent is never satisfied and the child is doomed to a constant sense of guilt that they take into adulthood like an effed up inheritance. And the guilt underlies that sense that there is something wrong with you, right? Guilt, I did something wrong, right? That there's something wrong with you or your family, or as you get older with your relationship. Other people's families seem more normal when you grow up in a narcissistic family. You may not feel as tense or on edge with other people's families, but you may still feel icky when you're with other people's families because of that sense of shame. In adulthood, it's the same. You may feel shame because you know you are staying in a relationship with someone who yells or cheats or lies, even if the world doesn't know it, and especially if the world does. The harmed person in the narcissistic relationship takes on the entire burden of shame and guilt for the relationship, and it is the primary brick of the trauma bond. It can start to get to the as good as it gets mentality, where many survivors take the justification to a point where they believe that, well, maybe I'm also part of the problem, or maybe I'm being too high-minded to think that this relationship can get better. And so there's a risk that you remain sort of resigned to that idea of maybe this is as good as it gets, which can also foster a sense of isolation. The guilt in particular can drive the pity. The pity is a unique piece of the narcissistic relationship because they are so manipulative and controlling and power-driven. We may think, why would we pity someone who has those qualities? Well, it's all that victim stuff again. The shifting back to victimhood when things don't go the narcissistic person's way, especially if empathy is your jam and you're a heavy in it. The narcissistic person's victimhood, sulking, crying, or their laundry list of the things that they have done for you, or whatever it is, may leave you feeling bad for them. And that's pity. Interestingly, it's not just performative. There is actually something kind of pitiful about narcissistic people. The insecurity, the always trying to pump themselves up, the every so often seeming like a lost child. There are flashes of that. And it can also make things seem worse. Again, this is majorly magnified when you're dealing with vulnerable narcissistic folks. You may see, for example, the aging narcissistic parent, perhaps maybe trying to get something right, but now, after all these years, it looks pathetic, and so you pity them. Pity is a very difficult emotion for anyone who's empathic and in one of these relationships, because it puts you in that caregiving rescuer role. And much like trying to save an injured porcupine, you may feel bad for the creature, but you are going to get stuck by their quills. But the pity also gives us a tiny bit of power, interestingly, for a minute in a relationship where we feel very little power most of the time. Because when we feel pity and want to try to make them feel better, it's sort of a chance for us to do something. But this is where your ick list becomes so important, because you have to use them as an antidote and a reminder of all the times this person was actually unkind and harmful. And if you do pity them and help them out, ultimately, you're going to bring out their shame and then their rage. But then there's your grief, this chronic sense of loss that it's multiplied by other emotions. When we're harmed by someone, we lose something, and we mourn that. And it may take a minute for us to realize that it is grief and loss that we're struggling with. You may grieve things like a childhood that you can't have back. You may grieve a sense of self that is taking a minute to develop. You may grieve your own children's childhoods. And above all, you will grieve the vast amounts of time you spent on these relationships. It can set up the good money, bad money, sunk cost part of the trauma bonded experience too. You already put so much into it. Maybe it can change. I can focus on the good parts. The grief slows us down. It mutes us. And since there is no real mourning ritual for people who go through toxic relationships, there's no, for example, funeral. There's no place to put a pin in it. Nobody's going to bring you a casserole. You're really going to be struggling with this grief alone. But it's not just one of these emotions operating, it's all four. And so when you scratch your head and say, what's wrong with me? Why can't I end this? Why can't I break up with them? Why can't I set a boundary or disengage or even go no contact? Dig into these feelings. They are the foundation and bedrock of the trauma-bonded experience. And they are uncomfortable feelings too. We don't like uncomfortable feelings. And to break the tension, we can make the excuses and justifications that allow us to take the blame and in a way feel in a little bit of control by making ourselves the bad ones. And while that doesn't feel good either, like I said, it can break the uncomfortable tension of the cognitive dissonance, which is the constant vibe of these relationships. 4 emotions plus a lot of confusion equals being stuck. It is the most complicated, simple equation of these relationships. So let's talk a little bit about the black and white thinking that can happen in narcissistic relationships. So let's start with the narcissistic people, right? They live in black and white thinking. It's a signature quality of all antagonistic personality styles. And it's not just them. Other aspects of the human experience can result in people having what's called black and white thinking. It's also called dichotomous thinking. But this black and white thinking is pathological in narcissistic people. For them, things are good and bad. For them, things are good or bad. People are allies or enemies. There are no multiple truths in the narcissistic person's world. You are either in or you are out. Now, if you grew up with a narcissistic parent, you didn't know anything. We didn't know what the hell was black and white thinking or dichotomous thinking. But this style of thinking infects the child almost to the point where the child literally perceives good mom versus scary mom, or nice dad versus mean dad. And the only thing the child wants to do is keep the good parent around. The child may even experience them as different people. The child internalizes that responsibility of the parent switching to bad, or for the bad parent coming around, and kind of engages in the lifelong experiment of figuring out what keeps the good parent around. And depending on the parent, that becomes a list of, okay, if I'm obedient, or if I'm silent, or if I'm good at the things my parent wants me to be, or if I'm really helpful, or if I'm never a burden, or I never have a need, if I'm good but not too good so I don't threaten them, and if I never push back and ultimately never develop a true self, just have the self that makes you safe and easy and convenient for the good parent, that's what you learn. The child is confused because sometimes the so-called good parent is around, so any negative emotion, such as anger towards the parent, is often coupled with guilt in the child for thinking that they were mad at that parent. And trust me, if you grew up like this, you get it. However, that narcissistic parent also views the child as either good or bad. And this is projected on the child, which is what drives it for the child. The parent will treat the child in different ways when that parent is more regulated, or when the child is giving the parent what the parent wants. The narcissistic parent is often in almost delusional denial about how badly they treat their child, almost as though it never happened, or perceives their screaming, yelling, or mistreatment of their child as being good for the child. I'm doing you a favor when I'm tough on you, kid. It's why you're great and you're not a loser like those other kids. So even this compliment is a gaslighted disaster of being told that their abuse is good for you and why you are good. So then the child has a sort of confused relationship with the parent's cruel treatment of them. It's really effed up. The child becomes aware of this and internalizes and attempts to be the child who is viewed as good, and experiences that fragmenting within themselves, those traits that are viewed as good, or the moments that add up to them as being as good, can become adult defenses and protections. Foremost amongst those, for people with narcissistic parents, are things like perfectionism, overwork, not expressing needs, silencing yourself, being obedient, overachieving, being a lone wolf. You don't need anyone. As you get older and perhaps enter intimate relationships, it can be quite similar. I have heard many times and read many times in literature, films, and in real life that when the narcissistic person is feeling good about you, it's as though the sun has come out after a long string of cloudy days and warms your face, and it's shining only for you. It is intoxicating. And part of it is like getting food after not eating for a while. Hunger makes everything taste good. The kind of loyalty that a narcissistic person demands, it's not loyalty, it's cultish. It's never question me. It's do not have your own value system. They demand unquestioning fidelity. It's having to do terrible things for the narcissistic person. Classically, this can happen in the workplace. So you're viewed as the good one. And as a result, many people who might have actually been allied with a narcissistic person for some period of time will feel a sense of moral injury even years after detaching from narcissistic relationships and learning about them. They may very well feel complicit in harmful behavior they feel they have done because they were doing what they needed to do to keep the narcissistic person close or to keep themselves safe with the narcissistic person. It's very complex. But we recognize that you being good in the narcissistic person's eyes is always only temporary. And the more we become what they want and don't question them or exert ourselves or have a need or ever give feedback or anything that resembles a critique, then maybe if we do all that, we could be good. Unfortunately, no. Because in many, if not most cases, you are not the only person or circumstance in the narcissistic person's life. And perhaps it was a day when people were bad to them. a bad day at work, or the sale didn't close, or someone didn't treat them special at the hardware store, or the cable wasn't working when they wanted to watch a show, then they will get back to the world is bad way of being and may lash out at you, regardless of how much you are playing the role it seems that they want you to play. The dichotomous thinking is a core issue as to why relationships with narcissistic people are so difficult. Because even if your behavior never offends or places a demand on them, you also cannot control their interior world. Hell, they may watch a television show and be jealous of a car that a character on the TV show is driving, and that can be enough to ping their insecurity, and then the world becomes bad again, and nothing is fair to them, and everyone is mean to them. So it's not just you that's good or bad, it's everything. Life, the world, the government, certain people in the world. There's no middle. It's either all bad or it's all good. And when it is going their way, it's good. And when it's not, it's bad. Initially, before you understand all the narcissism stuff, it's easy to engage and to believe you can reason with them and try to talk them down, try to bring them into the middle, especially when it's not about you. The whiplash that comes from going from being the bad one to the good one can be so confusing that it's difficult to talk about or even make sense of. But when it is about life, family dinner is always bad. This is terrible all the time. Spending time with family never works. And everyone is so disrespectful about all the amazing things I do. You may try to talk them down and bring them into a reasonable middle space. Well, you're wasting your breath, your time, and frankly, putting yourself into a wasted afternoon of gaslighting and pushback and mopping up after a tantrum. Family dinner is either the best ever or the worst. You can't bring them into the middle. And many people in these relationships waste years and years thinking that they can show the narcissistic people in their lives that blessed middle. Black and white thinking, dichotomous thinking, is a bigger part of the landscape of the narcissistic person's what we call dysregulation or lack of emotional regulation. For some narcissistic folks, they're either giddily happily and everything's the best. And at those times, they expect everyone else to be too when things are going their way. And if you are having a bad day on their good day, then you become a problem and you're depressing and you're the bad one. And when things are not going their way, they are often despondent or rageful. And heaven forbid that you're having a good day on one of their bad days. Then you are ungrateful or stupid or naive or can't see how things really are. In the most extreme cases, on their days, when everything is bad, narcissistic people can sound almost paranoid as to how much they think that the world is in a grand conspiracy to make their lives miserable. If you have a narcissistic boss, the workplace is divided into the loyal minions of the narcissistic boss, the people who are willing to do the boss's dirty works and be like the Lord of the Rings, Sauron's orcs, and do the boss's bidding, and smiling like Cheshire cats for the boss, and propping him on his good days, and playing into his paranoid fantasies on his bad days. Those who are actually trying to find that middle, or aren't falling into the cult of the leader, are often viewed as the problem. And either their lives will be miserable while they work there, or they quit. And this is actually how workplaces and organizations led by narcissistic folks crumble. All that is ultimately left are the narcissistic leader and their enablers. And you can't make money or policies or do any meaningful work except the narcissistic person's unreasonable bidding that way. It's really not a sustainable business or institutional model. Now, the mantra that you are either part of the problem a part of the solution, it can become rather bleak in the narcissistic person's hands. You are either an enabler and a never questioner, part of the solution to the narcissist, or someone who may sometimes have suggestions or observations or feedback that may be at odds to the narcissistic person, which then makes you part of the narcissistic person's problem. It's not good. And all of this is what drives that damn trauma bond. The good versus bad creates a vacillation in the relationship. And since you are sometimes good, you may want to stay in that position and stay as one of the good ones and believe that if you can just tweak your behavior a little, then you can get back out of the bad role and back into the good one. And that back and forth keeps you stuck. But this isn't just about calibrating your behavior. It's about giving up on yourself. It's really, well, if I never tell them how I feel again, and I don't bring that up, and I always smile, and I make things easier, and I don't ask for anything, then they'll think I'm good. And when you're not your true self, you are good. And when they are good, and you're giving them exactly what they need. I mean, that's a one-sided life, right? Listen, we all like when someone is being nice to us and complimenting us and making life easy. But we don't stop loving someone in a healthy relationship just because they question us or may not do exactly what we want. We don't think our dear friend is our enemy because they don't come to dinner one night. All of us are certainly happier and more content on good days, and we may need to take a breath, but may not give in completely to the idea that the world is a terrible place because there was traffic on the way to the airport, and then lash out at people who matter to us. We become dichotomized in these relationships, cut in two. So the inner fragmentation that we observe in trauma survivors and in survivors of narcissistic relationships is often played out in real time in the external world because of the narcissistic person's behavior. We live in a reality where we are sometimes good and sometimes bad, and may have always lived in that reality, and thus the risk of fragmenting the narcissistic person ourselves, seeing them as the good them and the bad them. And that fosters the trauma bond. I love it. I love the good them. It's the bad them. That's tough for me. But I'll wait for that good person to turn up again. And we may endure a lot of abuse while we wait for good them to come back, rather than the integrated whole. Their behavior is unacceptable at times, and they don't have empathy, and my true self will not be seen in this relationship, and this is not me, and I can't change it, but there's still times I enjoy the relationship. Dichotomized good-bad perceptions are infantile. For the infant, the good caregiver is the one who is right there feeding and attending to them, and the bad one is the one who isn't there the moment they need it. Natural human development under safe and attuned circumstances means that the baby learns to integrate the two. Bad caregiver and good caregiver just integrate into caregiver, who as a child has a more realistic take on the world, learns that sometimes that caregiver has other stuff to do and that's okay. And that's where stuff like regulation and self-soothing start to form. The narcissistic folks get stuck in this infantile state. We are either the good mommy who is either sticking a pacifier or a breast into their mouth, or the bad mommy who's rejecting them. And this is all very sweet and expectable in a baby, and it's ridiculous in a grown-ass person. But when this happens with our parents, our partners, our bosses, we'll feel crazy. Like, wait, I was the greatest in the world yesterday, and now I'm a terrible person? Like, what the hell? The lack of differentiation between me and the world is a real problem for narcissistic folks. And it's a real problem for people who are in these relationships. You aren't their psychoanalyst, and you cannot fix this. I'm actually not even convinced the psychoanalyst can do much either. But this good-bad dichotomy is a core dynamic of every narcissistic relationship. You are not two people, you are one, with a consistent, gorgeous, authentic self in there that sadly is not allowed to show up in this relationship without invoking the narcissistic shame and wrath. And it's important to not let their splitting of you become your reality. For survival reasons in this relationship, you need to understand it and figure out the workarounds. But it does not need to be your reality. Life is what happens in the gray. Love, relationships, all of life is everything that happens in the middle. Because other than gravity, birth, death, and taxes, we have no absolutes. Once you understand that middle path and live it as you, that's really the answer. And that is a really tough place to get to if you are in a narcissistic relationship.